Welcome to Podcast Recovery. We are your hosts, Eric V. and David O. Podcast Recovery is a forerunner in digitally accessible addiction recovery support. We provide ease and convenience to any and all seeking a message of recovery and hope. By broadcasting the stories of recovering addicts, we act as a complement to all other recovery services. We exist to create a global foundation platform so that any addict may hear a message of strength and hope. We contribute education and awareness by highlighting the diversity in the lives of recovering addicts to show that one addict helping another truly works. Today, we are joined by my co-host, David O. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic.
That's great. Where are you from, David?
I'm born and raised in Columbia, Maryland.
Cool. When were you first introduced to recovery?
I was first introduced to recovery in goodness, what year was that? Probably about 2010, but I didn't get clean until 2012.
Okay. And how long have you been clean?
I've been clean for 5.5 years now.
Awesome. And without further ado, David will now share his experience, strength, and hope with us.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, I guess this is episode 1 of 2 for get to meet your hosts, get to know your hosts. Actually, I was thinking about that question. When was I introduced to recovery? I always, for a long time, I've had knowledge of like other fellowships. But it was probably many years ago that I actually started to become aware of the separate fellowships, and that there was actually like a greater network of recovering addicts out there. But we'll get to that in a minute. So I was, like I said, I was born and raised in Columbia, Maryland. I have 4 sisters, and I'm the only boy, so that's instantly, that's probably strike 1 in my life right there of difficulties. Number 2, I had a very abusive and absentee father, so he was in and out of the picture constantly. And that was always hard growing up. I mean, if you ever Google Columbia, Maryland, you'll see many pretty stereotypical pictures of what a middle class American suburb is. You'll be like, oh, you want to find stock photos for a American suburb? Columbia, Maryland is it. So there were all these fairly wealthy families all around me, up and down, lining every street. All my friends in elementary school had like the whole complete family. Mom and dad had good jobs. They had 1 brother, 1 sister, 2 cats, a dog, a white picket fence, all that good stuff. And I didn't have that. So instantly, from a very young age, I started to feel different than everybody around me, which is sort of a common thing that I've found with most addicts that I've run into, is that at some point, whether it's actual or we create it in our minds, we have this idea that we're different than what we see around us, and it causes some sort of animosity. But I'll stick with me. It really did create like a rift between me and other people. Like, I thought I was different. My family was different than everybody else's. I didn't fit in, and some of my friends in elementary school even let me know that, like, because we didn't have a very organized household. It was kind of messy because, like, my mom was always working crazy hours to provide. Like, whenever my dad was there, There were horrible, like, loud fights that ended up spilling out onto the porch, into the front yard, and into the street. And then it was just, like, blatantly obvious that we were, like, the Addams family on the block. And I knew it at a very young age. And then my older sister, who shall remain nameless for her anonymity, started getting into her own addiction at a very young age when she was in high school. And she's about 5 years older than me, so I was probably 8, 9, 10 at the time, watching her spiral into her own addiction. And after a few years in recovery, I've really started to, like, pull a few of the layers back on my own personal onion and really see that I had addictive traits before drugs ever came into the picture. I have a huge sweet tooth. I always have. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved Cadbury eggs and chocolate and candy and just basic stuff that a little kid needs. But I would, like, army crawl into my mom's bedroom to root through her purse, or I'd steal from her change jar so I could run up to the local CVS and buy candy. So I was willing to, like, steal from my mom at a very young age to get what I want because it made me feel good. I liked candy, so I wanted as much of it as I could get. So I stole from my mom for it. Clearly that's, like, an addict behavior. Like, a 5, 6, 7-year-old probably shouldn't be doing that. Like, they probably shouldn't feel that it's okay to steal from their parents to get something that's going to make them feel good. So then I'm seeing my sister go into her own addiction. Like, I'm feeling animosity. I was also dealing with a lot of emotional and psychological and physical trauma from my dad. So, I don't know, around 11 or so, like, I started seeking stuff outside of myself to, I guess, like, to start off with, it really started as, like, an experiment. Like, oh, my mom smokes these cigarettes all the time. Let me steal some cigarettes from my mom. Because it wasn't a giant leap from change out of her purse or dollars out of her purse to buy candy to just go into the freezer and steal a pack of Carltons from her. So I started doing that. And then shortly after that, there would be, like, Malibu, chilling in the like the liquor cabinet or the pantry. So I would take her bottle of Malibu, and then instantly at, like, age 12, I guess it was like 5th, 6th grade, I'm now the cool kid who can get cigarettes and alcohol for all my friends. So now I start to feel a part of, like, those drugs, those, like, I mean, those the sneaky drugs, the nicotine and the alcohol, start to make me feel a part of. They really, like, counteracted that idea that I was different. People wanted what I had at that point. And so I got excited. I got excited about that. And then not too long after I was the kid with alcohol and cigarettes, some of the older kids, like, that my sisters knew, because I was third in line in my family. I had 3 older sisters and 1 younger sister. So I sort of knew some of the older people around the neighborhood. And by that point, I knew who the bad kids in the neighborhood were. So I could go to them, and they turned me on to marijuana. So by around, like, age 12, 13, I had started experimenting with weed. So now I'm stealing cigarettes, I'm stealing alcohol, and I'm buying weed. And of course, a kid that age can't work, he doesn't have a job, so how does he get money for it? He steals things. So I was a little klepto. I was a little thief, and I would trade either, like, my sister's CDs for, like, a nick bag or a dime bag or whatever. And I was off to the races. So and all of this stuff is, like, huge red flags for, like, stuff that was going to come down the road. And one of my favorite sayings has always been, the fish in the bowl doesn't know that it's wet. Like, I was just so immersed in my own life that I couldn't see what was around me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like all those like red flags that to anybody on the outside of the fishbowl could clearly see that like this kid is in trouble, and he needs help. Like I knew that all those red flags were there, sort of. Like I knew I needed help. I knew I needed guidance, and I was confused about why any of the adults in my life couldn't see it or like never really confronted it. Like, but like my mom was doing her thing, my dad was doing his thing. They like both did the best they can. And teachers in school, like guidance counselors, because like I started acting up in school. Because up until that point, I'd been a pretty model student, you know. Started acting up in school, started skipping school. I started going into school high at like in like 8th grade, which was pretty ballsy. I guess I was like a ballsy little kid, which is weird because I'm kind of short, a little skinny, white, unathletic kid.
It's very ballsy.
Yeah, that's pretty ballsy for a kid to be going into middle school high. And, like, I'm sure that, I don't know. I don't know what the teachers thought. But things just kept progressing. Got a job at, like, age 14 at the local ice rink. And even though I didn't have any bills to pay, I never managed to save $1 of that. And like I didn't have anybody to like show me like, hey, maybe you should open up a bank account or something like this. I didn't even know if I could open up a bank account at age 14. But like I forged my parents' signature for the work release like thing that you had to get from school. And literally that job was 100% to fuel my drug habit. Like I was like, I'm going to do drugs with all of this money. And that's what I did. And soon it became, I'm going to start dealing drugs because then I get drugs for free.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, exactly. Of course you're getting high on your own supply. And like you're making like pennies on the ounce or whatever. But yeah, I had the grand idea that I was like, oh, okay, everybody else is going to pay for my drugs and I'm going to get all the extras. And I don't know, I guess it works for somebody. It never really worked for me. Like it was barely staying afloat and I was just always throwing in my own money. But somehow like I got out of high school, like I graduated. Rewind a little bit. My first, I started getting arrested. I got arrested twice in high school. One time I was actually in a stolen car, unbeknownst to me, and I think I was 15 at the time. I didn't know the car was stolen. My friends just came and picked me up at like 1 a.m. and then we went joyriding, just smoking weed, drinking, having a good time. Then when they went to go drop me off, cops were there. It was a shit show. My parents, my mom was like, oh my God, I had no idea all this was happening. And what's crazy was I was literally arrested 50 feet from my house. Like he had pulled over right in like the little cul-de-sac right next to my house. And I was like, fuck, if my mom comes out here right now, my mom's going to get arrested for beating her kid in front of the police. But whatever. It was unbelievable. So that was probably the first time I got introduced to some form of recovery because I had to go to court because I was in possession of an illegal substance. So I had my first possession charge when I was 15, and I was sentenced to community service and addictions counseling. Like I had to go to a group, which I didn't like.
The place across the street from the mall?
Yes, the place across the street from the Columbia Mall, which remained nameless.
Been there.
Yes,
I know what you're talking about. Nice
facility, nice people work there. It didn't work for me at the time because I was completely unwilling to listen. Like I didn't think I had a problem. Like it was just like some weed, alcohol, and some cigarettes, and I accidentally ended up in a stolen car. That's not my fault. I didn't steal the car. Anyway, so that was probably the first time I got introduced to some sort of recovery or addiction support. And I didn't take it seriously. I didn't care. I was a 15-year-old kid. Most 15-year-old guys are idiots. And I'm sorry if you're a 15-year-old guy listening to this. I'm not calling you an idiot, but you'll find out later in life that you're not at the best place. And neither was I. Because it was my first opportunity to really open my eyes and say, hey, these people are trying to help you, and I ignored it. Continued 2 years later, I got arrested again at age 17, blah, blah, blah. And literally the exact same thing happened. I got a little community service, and I was sent back to the exact same little group across from the Columbia Mall, and nothing happened. I got a slap on the wrist, so, I was like, oh, this is it? This is all I'm getting? And it really, it kind of enabled me in a sense because I thought I was getting away with stuff. I didn't really have to quit. I didn't really have to do anything. I had to quit for a couple weeks so I could take a piss test at the end of the course, which was 60 days long or whatever. And I beat both of those. I basically, in my mind, I beat both those charges. But they were juvenile charges, so they were going away anyway. So I get out of high school. I do about a half a semester of community college at my local county, and I wasn't ready for it. I had no interest in being there, but all my friends were going to college and they're doing something, and I just had no plans. I had no direction, and I was 18 at this point. I had a car, and I just didn't give a fuck. I didn't give a fuck. I didn't get good grades, so I did 1 or 2 semesters there, and then I was off to the races. I had a girlfriend at the time, and started basically mooching off her to some extent because I had gotten her into drugs and alcohol in the process. We had been dating for a few years by that point, and her parents would pay for her apartment because she was actually going to University of Maryland, and she actually had a future, and I was kind of a leech, I was just a little parasite in her life. Looking at it now, really using this girl so I could get a free ride, honestly. I feel bad about saying that because I did have feelings for her because I was with her for so long, and I knew she was a good person, and she actually went on to do good things with her life. But obviously that is after me. It wasn't. I don't know. It was a couple years, but I was. I think it was right around age 20. She basically got fed up with my shit and was well, I had moved back into my old house because my parents had vanished to an Indian reservation because they were going to go back to their hippie roots, and they were trying to sell their house to my oldest sister. So she was like, oh, why don't you come stay here? And so I was like, oh, cool. I get to go back to the house that I was born in. Yes, I was born in the house I grew up in. I was a home birth. Just so
by choice?
By choice, yes. My mom was a super hippie, and she's also a nurse practitioner, so she pretty much knew what she was doing. Okay. Had a midwife and everything. I was born on a waterbed at home, so that's pretty cool. So anyway,
sounds like the 80s.
It was the 80s, 100%. That was the 80s. So they vamoosed to an Indian reservation in New Mexico. They were going to sell the house to my oldest sister. Oldest sister said, hey, come live back at home at your original house. So I was like, awesome. This is great. So I come back at age 20, and I'm living the dream for about 6 months. And then my oldest sister is trying to fix up the house, and then figures out that, my mom hadn't paid the mortgage in X amount of time, so they're going to foreclose on the house. So, yes. I'd moved out from this girlfriend's place. I was like, hey, I'm going to live here, and we're still going to stay together. So I find out from my sister that the place I've been staying for the last 6 months is getting foreclosed on, so I'm getting kicked out again. And then that girlfriend went back to her parents. Her parents hated me, so I couldn't stay with her. And so through a series of events and me continuing to use, I became homeless. And like my drinking and drug use had accelerated at this point. I had gotten into hallucinogens. I had dabbled in pills and powders at this point. And then now I'm homeless. My oldest sister, who was going to have this house, now doesn't have this house. So she has to go live with her family and her in-laws. And so I have nowhere to stay. My girlfriend's back at her parents. And all I have at this point is a Pontiac Vibe at age 20. So I'm living in a Pontiac Vibe. And that continued for 2 years. And like by this point, I had gotten arrested another couple times for more possession charges. I got a illegal fireworks charge. I had gotten an underage drinking charge. And like I've actually like timed it out. I was pretty much in handcuffs like once a year as of age 18 to 25. I was not I was not good at what I did. Mm-mm. So after I became homeless, I'm couch surfing. I'm still selling even higher quantities of drugs. I'm doing higher quantities of drugs. I'm starting to get into new drugs. And my life is just absolutely going nowhere because I'm just constantly on probation. I'm in and out of jails. I'm getting in bar fights. I'm living in a Pontiac Vibe. But for somehow I like maintained employment through all this. And then so for about 2 years I was couch surfing and living in a Pontiac Vibe. And then I see one of my old buddies at a gas station, and well, he's dead now, so I can say his name. His name is Brandon. Yeah, I met Brandon at a gas station randomly one day, and like I start talking. He's still doing drugs. I'm still doing drugs. He's selling drugs. I'm selling drugs. And he's like, "Hey man, where are you living?" I was like, "I am living in that car right over there." And he's like, "No, that's not going to do, man. Come and live with me." I was like, "Where are you living?" He says, "I'm living on top of a bar in Catonsville." I say, "No shit." That sounds pretty cool. I'm 21 at this point, 22. And he's like, "Yeah, dude, we'll have a blast. Come live above a bar with me." So I go live above this bar with him, and it is a tiny little complete shithole in the middle of Catonsville for like nothing. I think we were paying like $300 a month. Like it was nothing. And he had gotten into way harder drugs. I had met up with girls who were into way harder drugs. So by this point, I was doing copious amounts of hallucinogens, lots of cocaine, lots of Percocets. We were going to EDM festivals and getting DMT and acid and all these things. And I was literally just dumping cocktails of drugs in me constantly because my parents were out of the picture. My family was entirely out of the picture. The girlfriend who I had been with since like age 16 was out of the picture. I had nobody but this Pontiac Vibe and this shitty apartment above a bar. And we were drinking all the time. And like we were super paranoid. We We had some of those little mini bikes, the little pocket motorcycle things.
The 50s?
Yeah, the little 50s that, like, no human adult should be riding. But we were. We were zipping around Catonsville with backpacks full of drugs, dropping them off to people because we thought it was inconspicuous and slick and cops wouldn't chase us, which, honestly, they didn't. Like, we just... We're running a drug flop house for a couple years. Until and meanwhile this whole time, like I became unemployed through the 2 years living in the Pontiac vibe, and then Brandon has this random job opportunity, which I don't really know how he got it, but either way, we were process servers. We were serving people with subpoenas and warrants and eviction notices, and through that process, our bosses were Baltimore City cops who also worked SWAT, but they had this side business where they were a processing company for legal papers. And so Brandon and I were doing this, and while we were doing this, we had to get licensed as private investigators in order to do it. So Brandon and I are literally high out of our minds 24/7 with badges, private investigator badges around our necks, zipping around Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, all over central Maryland, dropping off subpoenas and warrants to people while high as fuck. And it was terrible. Like it's
That sounds amazing.
It was amazing
Just from like a theatrical point of view.
It's an amazing story to tell, and obviously I don't regret it because it's like where it got to me in the end of the story. And at the time it was fairly ridiculous because we could be high as shit wearing these badges, and whoever John Doe recipient of these papers wouldn't want to cooperate with us, so we would call the cops on them. The cops would show up and force these people to receive these be served by us high as fuck on cocaine. It was insane. It was my life had turned into absolute insanity, and it's a script you couldn't write. Like, it's because nobody would believe it, and it's crazy that was my life. And somehow, like, obviously 2.5 years of running that hard with somebody developed some sort of animosity along the way. We split, and then I'm homeless again. I meet up with a girl in Philadelphia. I'm dealing drugs up in Philadelphia. I'm moving them. I'm crossing state lines because I was going to a dealer down in D.C., getting shit from him, moving it all the way up to Philly. Philly drugs had different shit, so I was bringing back down to D.C. and Baltimore, and I was a drug runner. I was a drug mule, and in the process, I got another possession charge in Maryland and another possession charge in Philadelphia. Through the whole court process, which is a pain in the ass in Philadelphia. You don't just, like, in Maryland, you have one court date, you go, your shit's done, whatever it is. In Philadelphia, where it was, I had 5 separate court dates. Like, the first one was just a charges reading. That was it. That's all they did. Like, I went up there and they read my charge, like, a judge read my charges out loud in a courtroom and was like, okay, we'll see you in a month for your arraignment. And I was like, oh, what the hell? I was like, this isn't it? And they were like, no, this is not trial. This is just your charges reading. So I was like, okay. Round 2, I have my arraignment. My arraignment is the judge tells me, oh, this is how many... this is what you're possibly facing if you are found guilty. And I'm like, wait, this isn't the trial? They're like, no, this is just telling your potential outcome. And I was like, what the hell is the point of this? And then they're like, okay, we'll see you in another month for your pretrial. My pretrial? What the fuck is this? It's insanity. Meanwhile, every time I'm paying court fees. So, needless to say, I have a huge resentment against the city of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania.
Oh, not the city.
I do like Philadelphia.
Philadelphia's a great city. It's grown on me.
But the way Pennsylvania's court system is set up sucks.
Don't blame Philly for that.
I won't blame Philly. I apologize, Philly. If you're listening in Philly, I apologize, but your court system sucks. So I missed in the process of these 5 ridiculous court dates. I missed one of them, and they put out a warrant for my arrest. I then get arrested again in Maryland, and I figured it's just going to be another slap on the wrist. It's another possession charge, whatever. I'll be in and out in 24 hours. I'll get out on my own recog, and we'll go back to using same as always. This time I'm seeing the commissioner in Howard County jail, and they're like, hey, you have a detainer from the state of Pennsylvania. I say, what is that? They're like, that's where we have to hold you until they come and get you. And I was like, fuck. Because I had never done more than like 24 hours in a jail cell, ever. I had done some bullpens and some central bookings, and that was it. Always released on my own recog because I'm a loquacious individual, so I was always able to like, oh no, I live here, I have permanent employment here, I'm not a flight risk, which clearly I was. So I spent 8 days in Howard County Jail waiting for Philly to come and get me. And what was crazy is like I was like, because you get to talk to cops and everything, there was like, oh, there's a statute of limitations. If Philly doesn't come and get you in 8 days, then their charges are automatically dropped and you get to go home. I was like, oh shit, this is awesome. So the morning of day number 8, I'm feeling great. I'm like, oh man, I just did this easy week of jail time. I watched the Ravens games on a flat screen in jail, whatever, cool. And that morning, I get the knock on my cell, like my cell bars or whatever. And they're like, hey, David, pack your shit. You're going to Philly. And I was like, oh, no. I was like, I was going to be out at 6 p.m. They were like, nope, you're going to Philly. So I get shipped up to Philly for another week of jail. And that was a whole nother animal. Howard County Jail, which is where Columbia is. So it was a pretty nice jail. Philly jail, not fun. Not fun at all. I was stuck in a bullpen for the first 72 hours I was in jail with 20 other guys. There was no bathroom. There was no running water. We got shitty food. We got what anybody who's been in a jail is called a sweaty meat sandwich. A nice 2 pieces of white bread with a cold piece of bologna and a mustard packet, and that's your meal for the day. And then I finally get put on the cell block. I'm on 22 and 2. So 22 hours in my cell, 2 hours out. But in the meantime, like I was completely out of my element at this point because they actually took me to like a real jail. In Howard County, I was in with other small petty offenders. Like in this other jail, I was in with real people. And you've seen the show Scared Straight. Mm-hmm. That's basically what happened to me. Like, I was a skinny white boy from the county, completely out of his element, in jail in Philadelphia, and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I was like, this is not going to be my life, because if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to die, or I'm going to end up in jail for the rest of my life. So my mom and my little sister actually, out of nowhere, came and visited me in jail. And I'm wearing the jumpsuit and everything, and I get to have this really moment of clarity, a real Hollywood moment in my life, I guess you could say, where I'm standing behind the plexiglass on the phone with my mom and my little sister on the other side of the plexiglass on their phone, and I'm talking to them in jail, and I'm bawling my eyes out. I'm crying. I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I need help. Please get me out of here. I don't want to do this. So I get out of there, and for some reason, my mom had come back to Maryland and is living with my little sister. They let me into their apartment, and for the first 30 days of recovery, I completely white-knuckled it. I turned over my cell phone and my car keys to my mom. Yeah, turning over my keys and my cell phone was a necessary part to the beginning of my recovery, because I knew with those tools at my disposal, I was going to do what I knew how to do, which was get drugs and continue my downward spiral in life. So I turned those things over for the first 30 days, white-knuckled it. I don't recommend that for anybody listening. I was very lonely. It was full. Luckily I had already like detoxed in jail, so didn't have too many detox symptoms. I was still having really shitty drug dreams, all that. Like, wasn't sleeping, was miserable, wasn't doing anything during the day. So I knew I had to do something productive. I knew there was work that needed to be done in order to start a new life, and not continue going to jail. So I had old using buddies who I knew had, quote unquote, bunny ears, gotten out of the game, and because I had seen them on social media, seemingly having their shit together. So one night I get up the idea that I was like, okay, I'm going to go to one of these meetings, one of these recovery meetings that I had been exposed to earlier in life. And so I like Googled it and figured out where I should go, when I should go, and it was like a midnight meeting on a Friday night or a Saturday night. And I go, and my friend, oddly enough, just by sheer coincidence, my old friend and using buddy from like high school and on, I think it'd be fine saying his name, my friend Brad, was there, and he like gave me a hug and was like, "Oh man, I've been really waiting to see you here." And I was like, "What the fuck did that mean?" Like I was really indignant to that statement at the time. I was like, "What do you think? You like know something about my life that I don't?" And like he had been in recovery for a while, so clearly, yes, he knew that somebody like me needed to be here. And he had like a year or so clean at that point. But probably the biggest thing that I felt when I came to that meeting, and I had my mom drive me to that meeting, and like I was a wreck. I was a complete wreck. I don't remember like the speaker or what he said, but I knew like the feeling I had. I felt like I belonged. I remember like some of the readings and like some of the people talking about how they felt, and I like identified with those feelings. And there were actually two people that I knew from back in the day at that meeting, and they were getting their lives back together through these meetings. So I felt like I belonged, and I felt like this was an opportunity for me to be successful. So I started going to meet, started with that midnight meeting, which was a midnight meeting on Fridays and Saturday nights. And I did that for a little while until these friends started convincing me to expand my recovery, like start hitting other meetings, start going to like some other areas. So that midnight meeting was in Columbia, where I felt comfortable, like that's where I grew up. And then I started branching out, started going to Ellicott City meetings and Catonsville meetings, and it was difficult. And like recovery is difficult. Like it's not easy. Early recovery is not easy. because bottom line, I had no idea what I was doing. No idea at all. I'm in these meetings with a whole bunch of new people of all different walks of life, all different ages, but I knew that everybody was there for the same purpose, was like to get another day clean. And I started listening to people, and people had these messages of hope, of going through very similar things that I went through. Like, people had difficult childhoods and managed to overcome it and get clean. People were in and out of jail, managed to overcome it and get clean. A lot of these addicts shared the same feelings and thoughts that I did. And it was really like refreshing, because I had, from age 11 to 25, I had been running on like this me against the world mentality, and like nobody thought like me, nobody like has been what I've been through, and like that constantly like pushed me away from people who were trying to help me, and counselors that I kept having to go to through the courts. But these people, these fellow addicts, got me. They were like, we know who you are because we were that person too. And it was simultaneously scary and reassuring that, like, I've always kind of equated it to like standing in a line for a roller coaster, and you see a little 9-year-old girl who's like so super excited for this roller coaster, and you see her get on the roller coaster and get off, and she was so jazzed about it. And like I have a little bit of a fear of heights, but like I would always tell myself, I would be like, oh, if that little girl can do it, I can do it too. And it was kind of like that, like coming into recovery. I was like, well, if that person can do it, I can do it too. And that was really, it was inspiring to see all these people live a new way of life. And a lot of these people had way worse stories than I did. A lot of these people grew up in way worse neighborhoods than I did, or spent more time in jail than I did. And all these people were turning around their lives, and they were going to school, and they were getting jobs and careers. And it took work. Like the fellowship part, the social part, that was the easiest part. And then I started having to really start to do work on myself, because without drugs, I was still the same asshole. Like in early recovery, I was still an asshole. Like I was really opinionated. I didn't. I was still a rough around the edges kind of person. So I started doing work on my behaviors, because that was really everything that was beyond or underlying my addiction, was the behaviors and the thoughts and the feelings. So I totally lost my train of thought for a second. So one of the biggest things I learned in early recovery, and that I've held with me since then, is that I have a David problem, and drugs are just a symptom of that. For the longest time, I was running off the idea that, oh, I just had the drug problem. Like, I just have this drug problem or this alcohol problem. And it really wasn't the case. Like, I really have a David problem. I have a disconnect between my emotions and my thoughts and my actions that causes me to act out in ways where I want what I want when I want it. And that's how my addiction manifests itself into my life. Because I won't like the way I'm feeling, so I'll get an idea and then it'll immediately lead to my actions. But that that is so far beyond just drug use. Now, it's hard to really quantify it into words. I was born this way. Like I came off the assembly line with a crossed wire, and it caused me to go down the path I went. Like I don't blame my parents. I don't blame the schools. I don't blame this or that. Like I was responsible for everything that I did throughout my addiction. And now I was responsible for doing the work to clean up the wreckage of my past. So I was hitting meetings constantly. Early in recovery, I signed up for culinary school. I was going to school every day. Managed to graduate that top of my class with a 4.0, which I had never done before. And like I was applying these principles that I was learning through recovery to my life. I was showing up early. I was staying late. I was asking for help. I was actually listening to the help when it was provided to me, when it was like offered to me, and recovery has given me this ability to really stop reacting to everything that's happening in my life and take some time to process everything, process my feelings, process my thoughts, and respond in a healthy manner instead of being such an impulsive and compulsive individual. Because it had gotten to the point with my addiction that I was using just out of it. It was almost like a program. Like it's just what I did. It was just what I had been doing for 14 years of my life, and I couldn't stop. Like even though I was homeless, I was living a completely criminal lifestyle with no future, and I just felt like absolutely nothing. Like that was the biggest part of like my addiction, is I just felt so alone in the world. And coming into recovery was just the exact opposite of that, is that I didn't have to be alone anymore. There were people out there that were willing to help and be a part of my life and help guide me in this process towards these principles, towards these healthy life goals and techniques and tools to use in my life, like a network, like spiritual principles, really questioning my behaviors and really keeping me accountable for everything that was going on in my life. Because that's where it all, everything in recovery, like in these meetings, I'll go to a meeting for an hour. Like, those meetings are actually a small part of recovery. My recovery, for the majority of it, is outside of these meetings. The majority of my life is outside of meetings. Like these meetings are great. Having a sponsor is great. But if I'm not being held accountable, first of all, with myself, like being vigilant of my own thinking, my own behaviors, and if I don't have a network of people to keep me accountable, then it's easy to slip back into those really like dark thinking, dark feeling ways of life that ultimately always led to drugs. And early in recovery, it was difficult, but as time's gone by, that thinking of loneliness and basically never being good enough, or I was different than everybody else, started to change. And like, I found a family in recovery. I've found friends that I never really probably would have talked to in active addiction. Like, a lot of these people were probably not very nice people, and I was probably not a very nice person. I mean, I know I was not a nice person through addiction, but I gave myself the chance to learn and remain teachable. Like, that's the biggest thing, is really just having an open-minded approach to recovery and just letting myself get changed by others. Because that is completely the opposite of my addiction. In my addiction, I wasn't willing to be changed by anybody. Nobody's opinion was going to matter to me. Nobody's life was going to matter to me. I was going to do what I was going to do, and fuck you if you were in my way. And your opinion just didn't matter. And now so many people's lives and opinions matter, because I know that in recovery, all these people, for the most part, have my best interests at heart. And I've just taken it a day at a time, giving myself the opportunity to learn from every day, really take something out of every day and move forward instead of dwelling on a lot of the stuff in my past. I've gotten to look at a lot of my painful moments in life and what was my part in them, how did it affect me, and how I can grow from it, and not really like hold on to those resentments or really negative aspects of my life, that like all that baggage, I really carried it for a long time. And coming into recovery, I got to let go of some of that baggage, and leave it in the past, because I can't change it, but I can grow from it. And I've started to become a service to others. Like, I started being that voice for other people. I've gotten to do stuff like this, like be part of a voice of hope and experience for other addicts, to show that no matter what, you can recover, and no matter what you've been through, there's always a chance to redeem yourself and become a different person if you're willing to do the work. And for the first time in my life, like through recovery, I'm willing to do the work, and the work is just the dividends that it's paying are unbelievable. Like, I have a stable life, I have stable relationships, I have stable friendships, I've been employed for over 5 years straight, I've graduated from a college, and it's just amazing what recovery has afforded me. Just being able to take people's suggestions and really allow a program or principles to implement a new way of life for me. And that's like it. It's hard to quantify like where like the sky is the limit, in my opinion. As long as I'm willing to do the work and stay vigilant on my behaviors, and really just stay open-minded in this process and let life be life, and live life on life's terms, and not necessarily think that everything is happening to me, because not everything is happening to me. A lot of things are just happening around me. The things in life aren't going to get better. I'm going to lose relationships, people are going to die, pets are going to die, all those things, the life and life term things are going to happen, and they're not going to get better. They're not going to change. All I can do is learn to get better with those things, to change with those things. And no matter what, like there's no reason to pick up a drink or a drug. Like none of those things ever helped me before. They didn't help me get through any of those feelings, any of those hardships, any of those difficulties in life. Drugs and alcohol never helped. All they ever did was make things worse. And it took a lot of work and a lot of time looking at that stuff, reflecting, digging in, and really scraping out those old wounds and getting out that old dead tissue that I'd been just letting fester and linger for years upon years, to really start healing and growing and becoming a new person. And if I have any advice for anybody who's like out there, it's really start investing in yourself. Like we invested in drugs and alcohol for so long and not investing in ourselves that once you start doing that, you just don't know like where it's going to take you and like what you're capable of, through a process of like just saying, oh God, this is going to sound so cliche, just saying no to drugs. I'm so mad I just said that. Oh God, that was gross. That literally just pulled dare just channeled through me. But honestly, it's the case. Just like not seeing drugs and alcohol as an option, because it's not an option anymore. It's not an option in my life because it's a dead end, and it's gonna lead down that rabbit hole to nothing. And I'm tired. I'm not gonna dig that hole anymore. And yeah, I guess that's all I got. I hope I said something worthwhile.
All right. So, a few follow-up questions.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you grew up with 4 sisters, and your parents, you made your mother sounded somewhat like a hippie flower
Yes.
child, and
100%.
you said your father was absent much of the time. Now, do you believe that this upbringing was a possible, jumpstart into, behaviors and addiction in the future?
Definitely. 100%. So all these kids were these Brady Bunch families, and I was the Addams family, and I was so hateful, and it was just the seeds of rebellion in me that ultimately just led me to buck authority, buck my parents, really just I wanted to be the bad kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100%, having a difficult upbringing really started a lot of those really bad feelings that I wanted to mask. Drugs were the mask for for abandonment issues. They were the mask for insecurities, inadequacies, daddy issues. Bottom line, 100%. It was daddy issues that I didn't know how to cope with, and nobody was helping me cope with. But drugs made me numb to those abandonment issues, and so yeah, 100%. My upbringing was, I want to say a catalyst, but I don't want to use it as a cop out because I was still responsible.
That's true, but there are external forces that shape who we are.
And that was certainly some of them.
And how is your relationship with your family today?
Oh, my relationship with my family is great. all my sisters will actually talk to me. In my last few years of using, they wouldn't allow me anywhere near their kids. I wasn't welcome for holidays or anything like that. Still haven't spoken to my father. Haven't seen my father in 11 years. But my relationship with all my sisters has actually come back. It took about 4 years for my one sister to talk to me. She still wasn't convinced, and that's a price I had to pay for addiction. Like, I had to stay out of my nieces and nephews and my sister's lives and allow her to process that, all that hurt and pain that I caused the family. And I had to deal with it. There was nothing I could do. I just had to be patient and wait 4 years of staying clean for her to begin to come around to the idea that maybe this was going to be different.
Mm-hmm. We'll save that question for last. Okay, a little lighter here. So you mentioned the phrase "a fish in the bowl doesn't know it's wet."
Oh God, yeah.
So, does the hamster in the cage not know it's dry?
Does the hamster in the cage not know that it's dry? I'm gonna have to say, yeah. The hamster in the cage does not know that it's dry.
So these aren't sentient life forms.
I mean, they are.
Do we know we're dry?
Do we know that we're dry? Well, I'm of the mindset that water isn't wet. Water makes things wet. It's just water. Like,
wet is a reaction.
Wet is a reaction to what water is. Like, some people say, like, oh, water is wet. And I'm like, no, water is just water. It can't be wet. That's just what it is. It makes other things wet. Like, water can never be dry, so it's always water. But, like, in order for something to be wet, it has to be dry at some point in its existence. It's really like the yin and the yang of things. And, oh God, do fish see water? Like, we can't see air. Can they see water?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
This might be something you need to dive deeper into,
They're the rabbit hole of the internet.
So you mentioned, going to kind of a counseling facility as your first step in the recovery process. That was actually my second place I've ever went to, was that place.
Nice.
I guess it was nice. I mean, not, each way is unique and beneficial to everyone, and there isn't a right or wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was not the right way.
Yes.
But has there been any other sorts of outside, treatment, different types of help along the way?
Yes, actually, which I don't know how I forgot this in the telling. One of my other symptoms of addiction was self-harm. Like, I was a cutter for a period of time, and predominantly I was a burner. I liked that control over my pain, and through that, like, I also, like, throughout my life, I've struggled with depression. I struggled with I've suffered from night terrors for a lot of my life, and there have been a couple suicide attempts in my past, and so I would go to emergency rooms in times of crisis, and I would be put into psychological facilities. So that was also a part of my story, which I don't know how I didn't talk about that, but now I am. So yeah, there were definitely psych wards, and there were fellowship meetings brought into those facilities. So I was definitely exposed to different fellowships coming in to the hospitals and the institutions, trying to bring a message of hope and recovery to potential sick and suffering addicts. Obviously, I was in a psych ward, so there was more of a mental, emotional aspect to it there. But a lot of those, a very common theme for addicts is dual diagnosis, which is sometimes talked about and sometimes not talked about. But like I said, like I talked a lot about the psychosocial aspect to recovery. Like, it's very emotional based, it's very psychologically based. So naturally, like, depression and drugs tend to go hand in hand. Some people need to be medicated, and a lot of us take it upon ourselves to self-medicate for a long time, and it really tends to compound the issue, the problem, and it never helped me. So, yeah.
Okay. What was the main addiction that manifested itself upon entering recovery?
The other symptoms of addiction.
Just the main one.
Main one?
What really?
Probably sex.
Sex? Okay.
Sex was probably number one. Certainly, like, I've dabbled in all of them. Definitely the retail therapy, 100%. Like
nicotine, caffeine.
Nicotine and caffeine. Oh yeah, Red Bulls, cigarettes. Like, at one
that
point.
First year.
Oh yeah, first year I was smoking probably 2 packs a day, drinking at least 24 ounces of Red Bull a day.
Just 24.
At least, plus coffee and all these other things. I mean, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
It's 3 cans of Red Bull a day, and staying up to all sorts of crazy hours, but doing it clean. Like, did I have a energy drink addiction? Did that rear its ugly head? Yes, 100%. Luckily, I didn't get a kidney stone. But yeah, sex was a huge part of it, because I wanted to feel different. Like, I still wanted that high. I wanted those chemicals in my brain, that norepinephrine, the adrenaline, the dopamine, the serotonin. I still craved those things in my brain. The happy chemicals. I wanted those in my life, and I knew sex was going to do that. So yeah, sex was certainly an outlet, and it became an unhealthy, unmanageable outlet in my life. So yes, sex, retail, gambling, energy drinks, nicotine. Yeah, I exhibited all of them for at least some point in time.
All right, I'm gonna save the question about the PI for offline. We'll bring that up later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We'll just bring that off
enough.
later.
Yeah.
We're starting to go a little over.
Getting a little
but,
long in the tooth.
I'm seeing that you're wearing a Breakfast Club shirt today.
Oh, God, yes.
This is my last question.
All right.
Do you identify with John Bender?
Oh, God. I'm
just seeing some parallels here.
I hate you right now. I guess I deserve it for karmic reasons that you would bring that up.
Didn't he get a burn mark on him?
Yes. Yes, he did. Yes, for spilling paint in the garage.
It's been a little while since I've seen the movie.
Burned him with a cigar. Yes, and honestly, if any of the Brat Pack ever listen to this, yes, John Bender was a huge inspiration to me. Like, my whole style, like, I was an aggressive kid. Like I said, fuck you to teachers.
But you're sensitive on the inside.
But exactly, like, John Bender was the badass with the heart of gold, And that's who I wanted to be. I looked up to him. Like I looked up to those. He was probably the first one amongst many, like those characters that I wanted to be, like the Bart Simpsons, the Zach Morrises.
Zach Morris was a dick.
He was a dick. Yeah, Zach Morris is trash.
Yeah,
we all know
trash
that.
human.
Trash human. But like occasionally he was like the heart of gold guy.
Was he?
Occasionally he was. Bart Simpson certainly was. John Bender was. Like
Zach Morris is very questionable.
Okay.
I've read an article recently, like, I don't know, changed my opinion about Saved by the Bell.
Fair enough.
Totally changed my opinion.
Fair enough. But yeah, like I always and really there were these mask type characters, these really like duality based characters where they wanted to put off this image of being like so tough and so strong, while on the inside they were like kind of like crumbling. Like they were really in turmoil on the inside. And we see that a lot in life. I mean, like, look at Robin Williams. Robin Williams was struggling with depression and drug use for many years, but he, like, on the outside, a lot of people wouldn't have seen that. Like, he was always so happy and making people laugh. But we're humans. Like, we want to put on an image that everything's okay. When sometimes it's not. And yes, my Breakfast Club, John Bender, badass attitude was certainly my mask for a long time, and he was an influence. So thank you, Judd Nelson, for the influence. I know
seeing that right there.
Kind of a dick.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah.
Everybody, stay clean out there. Thanks for listening.
We would like to thank David for sharing his experience, strength, and hope today. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And don't forget to visit us at podcastrecovery.com.
Absolutely. Give us your likes, give us your follows, give us your shares.
And yeah. So until next time.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.